Hi, and welcome to Oxford Analytica's video briefing. My name is Dr. Chris Oates. I'm the North America analyst here at Oxford Analytica, and I'm joined today by Dr. Sara Hirshhorn at the Faculty of Oriental Studies. We're today talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, who this week went to U.S. Congress, made a big address, really unprecedented in that a foreign leader addressed Congress, received multiple standing ovations, and yet was boycotted by a significant part of one of the parties. So, Sara, first of all, what did Netanyahu say at this address?
Well, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave about a 55-minute speech to Congress full of standing ovations in which he denounced the leadership of Iran and a plan by the United States government that has been working in conjunction with the P5 to work out a deal with the Iranian government regarding nuclear enrichment and other nuclear programs.
So, and this is what I couldn't really understand about his strategy. It's about the Iranian negotiations. It's trying to sway U.S. foreign policy, and it was at the invitation of the group in Washington who has perhaps the least influence on U.S. foreign policy. It was at the invitation of Speaker John Boehner. It was directed effectively at the Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Senate and some moderate Democrats. But we have already known that President Obama is not going to put this deal to a congressional vote, and any sanctions bill that comes out of Congress will be vetoed. And from what it seems, the Republicans do not have the votes to override a veto. So why would Netanyahu make a major address when it's directed at an audience that is relatively irrelevant to the issue at hand?
So certainly Netanyahu has made a calculated partisan move to come at the behest of the Republican leadership. In particular, this visit was partially arranged by his current U.S. ambassador, or his current Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, who before he immigrated to Israel used to be an aide for Newt Gingrich, has strong Republican links. And clearly Netanyahu has made a gamble that in the case that a future Republican candidate is elected in 2016, that he wants to ally himself with them. But I also think that it goes far beyond this, that it's not merely a partisan issue, that Netanyahu also has a feeling of seeing himself as a kind of Churchillian figure and providing leadership at a time of crisis, and certainly trying to prevent what he views as a sort of Neville Chamberlain-esque appeasement by the United States government and President Obama with this deal with Iran.
Now, that analogy, one of the ways it falls apart is that Churchill never alienated FDR. But with that in mind, given that he's alienating the most important elements of the Washington foreign policy establishment, do you think this is a strategy to try to box in the president, or is it simply a miscalculation? Did he and Ambassador Dermer, who from everything that people say about him, is not a diplomat, he's a political operative, did they simply make a miscalculation about how this would be perceived in Washington?
I think there's a long historical tradition of the U.S.-Israel relations being fraught with tension, and certainly part of the Zionist ethos since its very origins was a sort of rejection of the diaspora and feeling that we don't need to do things that will please leaders of Europe or the United States. But I do think that they recognize this miscalculation, and the beginning of Netanyahu's speech directly addressed the controversy that had ensued when this visit was announced, and is sort of a apology for the way that this speech came about. I'd say that he's not only risking alienating the American foreign policy establishment, he also risks alienating American and diaspora Jewry that have strongly rejected this bid to come to Washington in this fashion. So he has certainly miscalculated, and I hope that there'll be some kind of effort to backtrack in the future. Nevertheless, I think that Netanyahu sees himself as a kind of historic figure, and he was willing to alienate whoever he needed to in order to get this message across. And unfortunately, it was an important and interesting speech that I think will but his machinations beforehand to come to Washington has probably deafened most of the audience that really needs to listen to it.
So looking long term, there's a couple different things that this impacts on. The first is the Iran negotiations. Do you think that this speech or the Israeli position in general will have an impact on those negotiations?
I don't think so, because it's clear to me that allies often have different interests, and that seems to be the case here with these negotiations. That the interests of President Obama and the United States are not necessarily diametrically opposed to those of Israel, but are of different concern. Obama is interested in opening up diplomatic relations to Iran and new economic ties as a kind of legacy for his project in the Middle East. Netanyahu is primarily concerned with the nuclear program, and I think that Obama, while acknowledges the risk to Israel and future, nuclear proliferation and development, simply has different objectives.
And so, long-term U.S.-Israeli relations, if Netanyahu is reelected in the elections happening on March 17th, do you think that there will be an attempt to accommodate Netanyahu, given that he will be in there for at least another 12 months, 18 months? So do you think that that will be a shift, or do you think that we will continue on as we are right now?
I mean, the U.S.-Israel relationship, despite its intense security cooperation and other forms of intervention, has been in decline for a number of years, and Netanyahu's likely re-election on March 17th will certainly exacerbate this problem. One of the questions that's arisen is whether this whole public gamble of going to Washington is really part of a private conversation of sort of what will be given as to sort of appease Netanyahu. Is there going to be some kind of deal struck behind closed doors in the future? That I think we don't know. But certainly Netanyahu, if he's going to stay in power, is going to have to deal with the United States, and unfortunately the United States will also have to deal with him. So hopefully they'll be able to work out some kind of accommodation.
And so even longer term, U.S.-Israeli cooperation, one of the things that we've been tracking is that U.S. approval ratings towards Israel have always been very high. It's always had a very bipartisan agreement pro-Israel. That seems to be changing. If you look at the polls, the demographic groups that are least favorable to Israel, younger Americans, non-white Americans, which make up an increasing percentage of the population and an increasing percentage of the Democratic Party. Democratic Party, which looks heavily favored for the 2016 election. And during this address, those who boycotted in the Democratic Party, largely Jewish American Democrats and the Progressive Democrats. So if we start to see not necessarily an anti-Israeli sentiment within the Democratic Party, but less so overtly pro-Israel, could we see military aid being cut to Israel, or U.S. support at the UN dropping if the next administration is Democratic and is in favor of a two-state solution, is in favor of no settlements, and is willing to go to the UN and oppose Israel to do so?
Well, certainly the demographic base of the Democratic Party has changed in a generational shift, both amongst Jews and non-Jews, and their attitudes towards Israel, has changed over the past decade or even 2 decades. And if Hillary Clinton is elected, it will be interesting to see what her policy has been. She has certainly been to the right of Barack Obama in terms of her public statements in support of Israel. So it's hard to say whether she would have any sway over congressional leadership and more widely amongst the voting base. But AIPAC, which is the primary lobbying group in support of Israel, is concerned about these demographic shifts and also the partisanship of Netanyahu's recent trip to Congress and what this may mean for the future. So I don't know whether we really see any kinds of serious sticks, the kind of things like, withdrawing loan guarantees, preventing exchange of military technology and intelligence. These elements of the U.S.-Israel relationship, I think, are pretty strong, but we might see less support in the United Nations, more public condemnation of Israel, which for the most part the U.S. government has refrained from in recent years.
Well, thank you. That's obviously a very big topic, and we'll be following it every day in our daily brief. And for more, check in with us at Oxford Analytica at oxan.com. Thank you.